Even before the tension subsides, it just keeps getting worse. After Iran faced the approach of the Marine units, the U.S. took another step that was far more serious. A large force is heading to the Strait of Hormuz, and this deployment is not just a simple show of presence, but a move that could change the control of one of the most important energy routes in the world. The 82nd Airborne Division is being sent to the Middle East. More than 2,000 elite paratroopers are included, soldiers who are trained for rapid, surprise, and high-risk operations. And here, the gravity of the situation becomes clear. This is no longer just airstrikes or movements at sea. This is a clear sign that ground operations are becoming increasingly likely. But before we continue, please like this video. It really means a lot to us content creators. Thank you very much. The more serious part is that these soldiers are part of the Immediate Response Force, a group that can mobilize within 18 hours after receiving orders. No delays, no long preparations. They're ready for any mission right away. They're not just ordinary infantry. This kind of force is designed to seize and control critical areas in a very short amount of time. This includes airfields, entry points, and facilities connected to the economy like oil terminals and pipelines. And here the possible target becomes clear. Karg Island, a small island but one that plays a huge role in Iran's economy. A large portion of the country's oil exports passes through here. If this is captured or controlled, it won't just affect the military. Iran's ability to earn and continue fighting will also be affected. This deployment is not just a show of force. This is preparation for a scenario that was once just speculation, actually putting soldiers on the ground and taking control of important locations. While this is happening, the direction of the fight is also changing, from long-range strikes to more direct and controlled operations, from surveillance to actually taking control of critical locations. At this point, it's still unclear when the next step will happen. But it's clear that the arrival of the 82nd Airborne Division is not just a simple reinforcement. This is a warning that what happens next could be closer, more aggressive, and harder to stop. And as this situation draws nearer, one thing becomes clearer. It only takes one wrong move for everything to change completely. Because once direct operations on the ground begin, it's no longer controlled by distance. It's controlled by presence, and when that happens, everyone involved will enter a whole new level of conflict. What we are seeing now is clear. The U.S. is forming a force that is truly designed to respond to chaos. And what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz is exactly this kind of situation. This isn't just simple tension. This is a crisis that has a direct effect on the whole world, especially because of Iran's blockade that caused chaos in oil and gas prices. As prices go up, prices in the U.S. also rise, not just from its allies, but also from other countries that are affected even if they're not directly involved in the conflict. And in the middle of all this, the deployment of the 82nd Airborne Division might be the answer to how America will deal with those rising prices. This is where the importance of Karg Island comes in. It's not just an ordinary target. It's a strategic point that can dictate the movement of the entire situation in the Strait of Hormuz. If it can be controlled, the U.S. would have the ability to directly affect the flow of Iran's oil exports. And at the same time, it could ease prices in the global energy market. But along with the possible benefits, there's also a huge risk, because such a move could be considered a major escalation, an action that could further worsen the conflict under Operation Epic Fury. There have long been signs that things were heading in this direction. For weeks now, there have been talks about a major deployment coming. And on March 6, the first indications came out. Suddenly, a major training exercise of the 82nd Airborne Division was canceled. The soldiers who were supposed to go to the training were held back at their base. It was a decision that was not immediately explained. At that time, the Pentagon gave a cautious response. They didn't say the real reason, but now it's clear. This wasn't just a simple schedule change. It was part of the preparations for a more serious operation while Iran's military infrastructure was being destroyed. In the early stages of Operation Epic Fury, and Operation Roaring Lion. The focus of the United States gradually shifted from air and naval strikes to a more direct option, deploying troops on the ground. And as the situation in the Strait of Hormuz worsened around the world, what was once speculation became real action. Now troops are heading to the area, and this is where things get more serious. It's still unclear what exactly the 82nd Airborne Division will do when they arrive in the Persian Gulf, but there's a high possibility that one of the options is a ground assault on Karg Island. This is a serious move that could give control over a critical part of the conflict. If this happens, it won't just be Iran that's affected. The entire course of the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz could change. And as this situation draws closer, one thing becomes clearer. Every move now carries weight, because a single decision could push the situation from controlled tension to a wider and more direct conflict. The 82nd Airborne Division has the capability to threaten targets in the Gulf region without having to go directly through the Strait of Hormuz. And this is an important detail in the whole situation. Even though the strait itself is dangerous and controlled by Iran, the United States still has a way to attack or operate without directly entering the riskiest part. And this is where the importance of Karg Island comes in. It's at the right distance. It's not too close to be dangerous, but it's close enough to be important for controlling the region. Karg Island may look small. It covers around 7.7 square miles. It has a population of about 20,000 people. Most of them are oil workers. But even though it's small, it plays a huge role in Iran's economy. Almost 90% of the country's oil exports pass through here. Before reaching the international market, this is the main lifeline of Iran's economy. According to the latest data, Iran earned approximately $43 billion from oil exports, and more than half of the country's total export revenue came from here. When you combine these numbers, one thing is clear, and because of this, it also becomes a weakness for Iran. If it's captured, Iran's economy will be directly hit. A large portion of its income will disappear. And in this situation, Iran will have a hard time funding its operations, maintaining stability within the country, and continuing the fight at the same level. So it's not surprising why this has become one of the main targets, with the deployment of the 82nd Airborne Division in the Persian Gulf. It's clear that the United States has a deeper objective. This isn't just about showing presence or increasing forces. It seems like this is preparation for a possible takeover of Karg Island, an idea that has been circulating for a long time, especially after the island's military infrastructure was hit in previous airstrikes. Such a move can change the balance of the fight in an instant. But no matter how good the plan looks on paper, it doesn't mean it's easy to execute. There are serious challenges. Taking an island this important isn't just about landing troops. There are risks involved, and there could be resistance. And there's a risk that the conflict could escalate even further. And at this point, as this scenario gets closer, one thing becomes clearer. The next step isn't just a simple tactical decision. It's a decision that could determine the direction of the entire conflict. No matter how strong the 82nd Airborne Division is and its immediate response force, there is a clear limitation to the unit. When it comes to capturing territory like Karg Island, the 82nd is classified as light infantry. This means they can be deployed quickly and are effective in rapid operations, but they are not designed for heavy combat against armored units. Even during the landing itself, the situation is already dangerous, especially if the enemy has tanks or heavy weapons ready to meet them. On top of that, there's another big problem: the distance. Iran and its missile launch sites are closer to Karg Island than any U.S. support base. Iran would be able to respond more quickly if an invasion were to happen. So even if the U.S. has a plan to use the 82nd to put pressure and possibly take the island, it's not that simple. It's true that there have already been airstrikes on the military infrastructure of Karg Island. It's possible that Iran's armored assets were targeted there to reduce the threat. But there's another question. Several weeks have passed since the strikes happened. Iran had enough time to send more equipment and strengthen the island's defenses. If that happened, the same problem would come back again. A light infantry force against a heavier defense. But here it becomes clear that the U.S. isn't just planning to use the 82nd Airborne Division. This isn't a solo operation. Even before the deployment of the 82nd was announced, the U.S. had already sent 2 Marine Expeditionary units. One came from the USS Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group, bringing thousands of Marines from Okinawa. The other is the USS Boxer Amphibious Ready Group from San Diego. Combined, this adds thousands of troops to the U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf. And this is where the whole picture changes. The MEUs are not like the 82nd, which focuses on airborne deployment. They are made for amphibious assault. They are exactly the unit capable of carrying out an attack on an island. They have the capability to bring in heavy weapons, armored vehicles, and support from the sea and air. If the 82nd is fast and flexible, the MEU, on the other hand, provides the strength and force needed to take and secure a place like Karg Island. At this point, it's clear that the U.S. plan is not just to send a single unit. This is a coordinated operation, combining the speed of airborne forces and the strength of amphibious assault units. When these two are combined, the chances of overcoming challenges increase, from armored resistance to Iran's rapid response. And as these forces continue to arrive in the region, one thing becomes clearer. This is no longer just about pressure or deterrence. This is now about the possibility of a direct operation, a move that could change control over Karg Island. And in the bigger picture, it could change the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. The MEU is not just an ordinary force. This is the kind of unit that usually arrives first in the middle of a conflict, bringing complete capability to handle almost any situation. It's not just made up of infantry. It includes armored vehicles, helicopters, fighter jets. In this kind of situation, if Iran mounts an armored response on Karg Island, the MEU has the capability to meet and fight that. And because 2 such units are being sent along with the 82nd Airborne Division, it becomes clear that what the U.S. is doing is not a simple deployment. This is a complete preparation for a more complicated operation. At first glance, it seems like the biggest challenge is how to take Karg Island. But in reality, the bigger problem is what happens next. How to handle and maintain it. Because even if the U.S. takes the island, that's when the real fight begins. Karg Island is a very powerful bargaining chip. A large portion of Iran's oil exports pass through here. If this is controlled, the U.S. will have significant leverage in the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, but Iran knows this too. And they have ways to reduce that advantage. One of the most extreme possibilities is for Iran to destroy it themselves, to its own oil facilities on the island before the U.S. can take it. Just like what was done before in the Kuwait oil fields. Everything will be burned so the enemy can't benefit from anything. If this happens, the main reason why the U.S. wants to control the island will be gone, and what the soldiers will face is a massive fire and chaos. It will be harder to control, especially if they're already inside the island. But this kind of decision comes with a price: severe damage to Iran's economy. And the effects could last for several years. Aside from that, Iran has another big advantage: location. Karg Island is very close to Iran's own coastline, while U.S. support is much farther away. Iran can send reinforcements faster and attack more easily, while the U.S. still needs to bring supplies from farther locations. And this is where another danger comes in. Once U.S. forces are on the island, they become fixed targets. Even if a large part of Iran's missile infrastructure has been destroyed, there are still mobile launchers left. They can come out, launch missiles, and immediately return to hiding. Because Karg Island is small, it doesn't take many strikes to cause significant damage. Even just a few hits can cause serious casualties, especially if a strong air defense can't be established right away. At this point, the situation is clear. This isn't just about the strength of the forces. It's about the ability to handle the situation after the first move. Taking the island is just the beginning. The real challenge is how to hold it while facing continuous threats. And while the U.S. combines the speed of the 82nd and the strength of the MEU, you can see that they're thinking about the whole plan, not just how to win the first battle, but how to maintain control afterward. But despite all this preparation, one thing is clear: any mistake in this kind of operation could change the direction of the entire battle. Because at this level, every move has a huge impact. Despite all the dangers, it's clear that many of these challenges can be prepared for and overcome by the U.S. As the Marine Expeditionary units approach the Gulf region and the 82nd Airborne Division follows, a force is gradually being formed that is enough not only to take, but also to maintain control of Karg Island, if that is indeed the target. At the same time, preparations for air defense are likely already underway, possibly coming from bases like Kuwait. Once the island is taken, it will immediately be used to protect the troops. While this is happening, U.S. air power continues to attack missile launch sites along the Iranian coast. The goal is to reduce the risk to the troops who will be landing on the island. In this way, the U.S. is trying to reduce the risk of their forces becoming easy targets. But even if it seems like there's an answer to every problem, there's one important question. Is such a large-scale operation worth it? For the U.S., the answer is probably yes, because the real objective is not just the island, but control over the Strait of Hormuz. Karg Island serves as leverage, a piece that can be used to force Iran to reopen the strait and restore the normal flow of energy. In the current situation, the impact of the strait being blocked is enormous. Around 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas passes through here. That means every day it doesn't function properly. There is an immediate effect on energy prices and the economies of many countries. In recent weeks, it's clear that Iran has used this position as its strongest card. From what used to be almost 140 ships passing through the strait each day, it has dropped to just a few, sometimes 5 or 6 a day, and most of them are connected to Iran. Not only that, they even turned it into a way to make money. Controlled routes were established where ships had to pay for safe passage. It is said that the fees can reach millions of dollars just to cross. Aside from creating a crisis, Iran is also profiting from the situation. In this context, it becomes clearer why the U.S. is willing to risk such a large operation. It's not just about a military objective. It's about regaining control over a crucial part of the global economy. Karg Island becomes the key, not because it's the center of the conflict, but because it provides leverage against Iran. And as the U.S. continues its preparations, the real battle becomes more apparent. It's not just about who is stronger, but about who can control the flow of energy that reaches the entire world. Iran may claim that the Strait of Hormuz is open because they have approved routes for passage, but it's clear to the U.S. and many other countries that this is not true openness, because the fees are extremely high. Reaching millions of dollars, it's as if it's being deliberately turned into a barrier. Almost no ships can pass through, except for those who are desperate or have a direct connection to Iran. In this situation, it's not enough to say that the strait is operational, when in reality it's still almost closed to most of the world. This is where the importance of Karg Island as a target comes in. It doesn't immediately solve the problem, but it can help a lot to change the course of the situation. If the U.S. controls the oil infrastructure on the island using the combined strength of the Marine Expeditionary Unit and the 82nd Airborne Division, Iran's economy will be directly hit. They will lose billions of dollars. And in the midst of the current crisis, this kind of pressure could force them to change their position. At that point, the U.S. can use Karg Island as a bargaining chip. A clear offer: open the strait in exchange for restoring access to the island and its oil flow. But while the military option seems clear, something else is happening behind the scenes. The talks about a ceasefire? According to Time magazine, there are signs that negotiations between the U.S. and Iran are starting. But these are full of confusion and conflicting statements. According to Donald Trump, Iran is supposedly ready to make a deal because of the severe damage to their military infrastructure. And one of the main goals of the U.S. is to ensure that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons. There is also mention of a broader plan for a ceasefire. This includes sensitive issues such as Iran's renewed support for proxy groups. These are issues that are difficult to discuss and could become obstacles to any agreement. On the other hand, the tone from Iran is very different. They deny that there is real progress in the talks. For them, it seems like the U.S. is just talking to itself. They say that America's statements are not signs of an agreement, but rather attempts to cover up the lack of results. And according to reports, many within America and Iran, especially in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are not open to compromise. Even though their military infrastructure has already suffered significant damage, for them, retreating or making a deal could be seen as a sign of weakness. That's why they prefer to maintain a hardline position. In the end, two clear directions are in conflict: the military pressure intensified by the possible capture of Karg Island and the diplomatic path being pursued behind the scenes amid the tension. Both have the potential to change the course of the situation, but both also carry significant risks. And while the movements of forces on land, sea, and air continue, it is still unclear which will come first: an agreement on the table or a deeper operation right in the middle of the battle. At this point, it is clear how chaotic and difficult it is to understand what is really happening. The messages from both sides are different. On one hand, there is talk about negotiations. On the other hand, the fighting continues. And this is where the possible real reason for sending the 82nd Airborne Division to the Persian Gulf comes in. Yes, it's still possible to take Karg Island, but there might be another deeper move happening. A strategy that uses confusion as a method. While Donald Trump mentions the possibility of negotiations, it's also possible that he's using this to unsettle Iran. Because of the previous strikes and the loss of some leaders, it's clear that there are already cracks within their group. When the situation is like this, clear communication becomes difficult. Some groups believe that talks are already underway, while others are certain that there isn't. And this kind of confusion can be taken advantage of. While Iran is unsure about what will happen next, U.S. forces continue to move closer. And while all of this is happening, movement on land and sea does not stop. The 82nd Airborne Division is approaching. Following this are 2 Marine Expeditionary units. Even if the operation on Karg Island is not fully carried out, the presence of such a strong force is a clear message. The U.S. is showing that it is ready for all possibilities, from diplomacy to directly deploying troops on the ground. This is not just intimidation, this is concrete preparation. In this situation, it's as if the U.S. has put the decision back in Iran's hands. The next move is up to them. If the negotiation is real, it needs to be clear and serious. If not, it's clear that a more severe action is coming. And as the tension rises, the possibility of a major event draws nearer. A move that could determine the direction of the conflict. Even before the deployment of the 82nd was announced, the U.S. had already begun weakening Iran's defenses. They did this through powerful bunker-busting strikes against underground missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz. This means it wasn't a sudden plan. These were consecutive steps. First, weaken the enemy's capabilities, then gather forces, and then wait for the right time to act. In this setup, it's clear that everything happening now is part of a bigger plan, where every move has a reason, and every decision can determine what will happen next.